Hello friends! Welcome to my new video! This video follows up on my previous one titled Future Prediction until 2030 from Verica Obrenovič, in which I provided a brief summary of the prophecies of the greatest fortune teller of our time, Mrs. Verica Obrenovič. On my channel HeroHero, I have also prepared a more extensive prediction of the future of the whole world from her. You can find the links to these videos below. Prophecies of Mrs. Obrenovič were kept secret from the public for years, and her collaborators most often included only leading politicians and generals of Serbia. One of these generals commented on her prophecies by saying that they are 100% reliable. It is no wonder that she is called the Serbian Vanga. While preparing the materials for these videos, I watched over 8 hours of interviews with her. What was very interesting and at the same time very disturbing, in every single interview she mentioned the eruption of the Yellowstone volcano in the USA and always placed strong emphasis on this warning. And what did Mrs. Obrenovič say about America? I quote, "The economy will be bad. All prices will start to fall. The dollar will lose its status as a world currency. It will lose its value thanks to the policies of China and Russia, and the ruble will gain strength. America, after a cold winter, fires, floods, and the eruption of the Yellowstone volcano, will deal with its own problems. They will help their own people, so they will interfere less in the lives and politics of other countries. America will cease to be a threat to peace, will stop waging wars, it will cease to be a dominant power." That Yellowstone volcano eruption honestly scared me. So, is there a high probability that Yellowstone will erupt? And what would that mean for us as a humanity? I was curious, so I started looking for some information on the internet. I can say that the internet is full of them on this topic, but it is very difficult to extract any relevant information from it. On scientific level, it seems as though there is a competition to see which scientist can best deny any possibility of an eruption. On the other hand, YouTube influencers with terrified expressions on their faces announce that Yellowstone is about to erupt any day and that all of humanity will be wiped out. So I decided to tackle this topic myself. I studied a lot of information and, using common sense, put it all together into this video. Hopefully, it will help you understand a little bit and form your own opinion. So, let's talk about volcanoes in general and their current activity. We will go over the largest volcanic eruptions in history and their consequences. I myself had no idea that it was not just a temporary closure of air traffic, but huge global consequences which are not talked about much. Then we will mainly focus on the Yellowstone supervolcano. We will look at why it is so dangerous, what would happen if it really erupted, what would flow, and how this explosion would affect life of our entire planet. So let's start. Sometimes we hear about a volcano erupting somewhere. The news shows some footage of rescue operations, but otherwise we don't know much about volcanic activity. They seem far away and don't affect us. They also don't erupt with enough force to be talked about and their consequences. Yet these are events that affect not only our lives, but also the planet's entire ecosystem and the weather for months or even years to come. What exactly is a volcano? A volcano is a place where magma, steam, and volcanic gases reach the surface or where this has occurred in the past. Volcanoes are among the most fascinating and mysterious natural phenomena on our planet. At the same time, they can also be among the most powerful and destructive. They have created many islands, and volcanic activity has also contributed to shaping the continents as we know them today. Most of us imagine it as a volcanic cone. The most famous volcanoes of this shape include Japan, Mount Fuji, and Italy, Mount Vesuvius. This hill is composed of solidified lava and volcanic ejecta. But there are different types and shapes of volcanoes. If we talk about Yellowstone, the shape of this volcano is called a caldera. It is a large circular depression that is created when, after a strong volcanic eruption, the magma chamber empties and the rocks above it collapse inward. The volcano actually collapses into itself. An eruption occurs when the pressure in a volcano increases to such an extent that it violently breaks through the Earth's surface. Lava, volcanic gases, ash, volcanic debris, pyroclastic flows, and lahars reach the surface. Although it is tempting to think that lava is the most dangerous of all these elements, this is far from the truth. Despite the fact that it is up to 1000 degrees Celsius and burns everything it comes close to, it moves very slowly and can be overtaken by a car. One of the most dangerous manifestations of volcanic activity are the aforementioned pyroclastic flows. These are hot avalanches of a mixture of ash, rocks, and gases that can rush down the slopes of a volcano at speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour with temperatures of up to 500 degrees Celsius. There is really no escape from them. Another danger is the so-called lahars. These are volcanic midflows. They are formed when ash mixes with rain or melted snow on the slopes of a volcano. This creates a thick mass of mud and rocks that rushes down valleys, destroying everything in its path. Volcanic gases are toxic hot gases released from molten magma, and it rises to the surface. They consist mainly of water vapor, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, silicon fluoride, ammonia, and radon. Every volcano is unique in terms of its shape, the composition of its gases and magma, and its eruptions. Therefore, not all of these phenomena mentioned may occur, or, on the contrary, it may be a complete set. I will show you with a few examples what the eruptions of specific volcanoes looked like in the past. The intensity of volcanic activity is measured using the Volcanic Explosivity Index, the abbreviation VEI. When assessing the intensity of an eruption, the volume of ejected material is rated on a scale from 0 to 8. The scale is logarithmic, which means that each level is 10 times stronger than the previous one. Level 8 is 10 million times stronger than level 1. There are about 1,500 active volcanoes on the planet and about 10 so-called supervolcanoes. The term supervolcano refers to volcanoes that have the potential to erupt at the VEI 8. An eruption at Yellowstone would be almost beyond the scale. The higher the VEI index a volcano has, the longer it takes to build up the pressure needed for its eruption. VEI level 1 eruptions occur almost daily around the world. These are very small eruptions. Some volcanoes erupt several times an hour. VEI2 eruptions occur about every other week. VEI3 eruptions occur once every 3 months. Wave 4 eruptions once every year and a half. For example, the Laki volcano in Iceland erupted with this intensity in 1783, remaining active for about 8 months. Over 120 million tons of sulfur dioxide entered the atmosphere. A toxic cloud formed and spread across all of Europe. The released sulfur dioxide, fluoride combined with moisture and volcanic ash contaminated the pastures around the volcano and killed an estimated quarter of the population, 80% of the sheep and half of the horses and cattle on the island. The sulfur dioxide released into the air during the explosion reacted with the atmospheric moisture to form sulfuric acid. This caused acid rain, very acidic rain. According to temporary records, the acid burned a hole in a sorrel leaf and burned the sheep's skin. The eruption was able to change the global climate for several years and brought severe winters and famines to Europe and America, and drought to the African continent. In Britain, livestock were dying off. In France, crops failed, hunger and disease affected millions of people. Some historians claim that this crisis contributed to the Great French Revolution. This event also disrupted rainfall patterns as far away as India and Japan, where it even led to the worst famine in Japanese history. There was a massive rice crop failure that caused the death of more than 1.5 million people. Even in Czech Republic, the melting of the thick snow cover after a severe winter caused a flood in Prague, which even damaged the Charles Bridge. The Vltava River rose by 4 meters in 12 hours. A statue of an angel fell from the bridge into the water, which was only fished out by divers during bridge repairs in 2004. However, it is necessary to take into account that everything happened during the ongoing Little Ice Age, so the already cold period was made worse. Despite this, the Yellowstone eruption could be 10,000 times more powerful than the Laki eruption. This was only a VEI4. Returning to our volcanic activity scale, we come to VEI5. Eruptions of this magnitude occur approximately once every 12 years. Perhaps the most famous volcano that erupted with this force is Vesuvius. Its eruption in 79 AD completely destroyed the Roman city of Pompeii. The beautiful mountain near the city was silent for hundreds of years, but one day in 79, small, barely noticeable tremors began to occur. In the afternoon, the earth opened up. After a huge explosion, a huge column of ash and gases rises to a height of 20 kilometers. The sky is covered in black. A huge amount of volcanic ash falls on the city and roofs collapse under its weight. Finally, a deadly pyroclastic flow full of a hot cloud of gas and rocks arrives. The temperature of hundreds of degrees. There is no escape from this cloud, rushing at a speed of several hundred kilometers per hour. In less than 20 hours, Pompeii disappeared under 6 meters of ash and pumice. Vesuvius supplied its surroundings with hot ejected material for 3 days. Pompeii was discovered by chance only in 1599 during the excavation of a canal. Volcanoes erupt with an explosive force of VEI6 approximately once every 50 to 100 years. Krakatoa volcano erupted with this force in 1883, or Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines did so in 1991 after 500 years of inactivity. Since this event took place in our modern history, we have detailed documentation of it and do not have to rely on scientists' estimates. Many consider the first sign of the volcano's awakening to be an earthquake measuring 7.8 on the Richter scale, with an epicenter 100 kilometers from the Pinatubo area. Almost a year after this event, the volcano's first eruption occurred, followed by several others. During its most powerful eruption, the volcano sent ash cloud 40 kilometers high. The landscape was covered in volcanic ash and pumice. Huge pyroclastic flows roared down the slopes of Pinatubo, spreading in all directions and reaching up to 16 kilometers away from the volcano. The ash cloud circled the globe several times. Typhoon rains and floods mixed with ash deposits caused massive lahars and collapsed roofs of many buildings. The eruption ejected approximately 10 cubic kilometers of material. A vast amount of farmland was destroyed in the area and hundreds of thousands of livestock were killed. 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide were released into the stratosphere, where they formed a haze of sulfuric acid droplets in the atmosphere, leading to acidic rains. Sulfur dioxide aerosols released into the stratosphere act as a mirror that reflects sunlight back into space. The reduction in sunlight reaching the Earth's surface results in what is known as a volcanic winter. Especially after the explosion of the Pinatubo volcano, global temperatures dropped by about 0.4 degrees Celsius. The stratospheric cloud from the eruption persisted in the atmosphere for 3 years. The region is still recovering from the consequences of this disaster. The recovery of the river system following the eruption will take decades. Yes, it could be worse. We have a VEI7 here. Such strong eruptions occur approximately once every 500 to 1000 years. The Indonesian volcano Tambora erupted with such unimaginable force in 1815. This explosion is considered the largest recorded eruption in human history. The explosion threw an estimated 160 cubic kilometers of ash and volcanic gases into the air and leaving behind a caldera 7 kilometers in diameter. 400 million tons of ash were released into the atmosphere. Lava flowed from the volcano and the surrounding landscape was devastated by thrown rocks and pyroclastic flows. Huge amounts of sulfur dioxide were released into the air. This toxic cloud circled the entire northern hemisphere and caused a global temperature drop of up to 0.7 degrees Celsius compared to the long-term average. Such a temperature drop may not seem serious, but in reality it can mean huge temperature differences when the temperature can drop by 35 degrees Celsius in some places within a few hours. The following year, the complications peaked, and 1816 is called the year without a summer. In some places in the northern hemisphere, there were even snowstorms in May and frost in June, and it rained almost the entire summer. Low summer temperatures and even frosts disrupted harvests and caused famine in many places in the world. Prices of all kinds of food rose dramatically. People reacted to the shortage of food and the rising prices with riots and looting. People slaughtered horses en masse, which were the main means of transportation at the time. This is said to have led to the invention of the bicycle. It is generally believed that Tambora caused the worst global famine of the 19th century. In a weakened population, diseases such as typhoid and cholera spread more easily. That is why large cities such as New York, London, Hamburg, and others improved their sewerage networks. Beyond the limits of human understanding and imagination is the eruption of a volcano with a strength of BEI 8. It ejects material with a volume of more than 1,000 cubic kilometers. We have about 10 such supervolcanoes on this planet, whose previous eruptions caused disasters of global proportions. Eruptions of such power occur approximately once every 50,000 to 100,000 years. The last such huge eruption occurred approximately 26,000 years ago in New Zealand. About 70,000 years ago, there was a huge eruption of the supervolcano Toba, which ejected 100 times more ash than the explosion of Tambora and left behind a caldera with a diameter of 100 kilometers. It was the largest volcanic eruption in the last 2 billion years. Estimates say that the eruption ejected more than 2,800 cubic kilometers of material. The ash covered the whole of South Asia. The explosion caused climate change on the entire Earth, with the average temperature decreasing by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. This was already during the ongoing Ice Age. According to some historians, only 15,000 people survived on Earth, and it is said to have been responsible for the extinction of Neanderthals. And there was a serious extinction of other species of fauna and flora, which was also helped by acid rain. This explosive potential is also hidden in the main character of today's story, Yellowstone. Yellowstone is a beautiful nature park that enchants us with the beauty and diversity of nature, with many attractions in the form of lakes, hot springs, and breathtaking geysers. However, this natural beauty was created at the site of 3 huge eruptions that occurred over the past 2 million years. These huge eruptions created a caldera measuring 55 by 72 kilometers. Yellowstone is truly unique. It doesn't have just one magma chamber, like other volcanoes, but 2. For a long time, scientists believe it had only one, the upper chamber, which has a volume of only 4,000 cubic kilometers and about 5 kilometers below the Earth's surface, which is not exactly a safe depth. Later, however, scientists discovered another magma chamber at a depth of about 20 to 50 kilometers, which has a volume of about 48,000 cubic kilometers. The size and duration of a potential eruption would depend on this volume. As for the scientists, they are regularly wrong about Yellowstone. Until the mid-1960s, they had no idea what danger lurked here. Even after they discovered that it was really a supervolcano, they claimed that this area was no longer active and therefore no danger. Another mistake. It wasn't until the 1980s that surveyors discovered that the land in Yellowstone was rising about 40 centimeters in less than 100 years. And at that time, NASA also finally discovered, thanks to images from space, where the caldera is exactly located, because it is not so clearly defined. Now that they have found this caldera, it has become the most closely watched volcano on the planet. Scientists here use the most modern instruments to measure all possible parameters that could be a sign of any eruption. Using satellites, they can measure even slight changes in the terrain's high, which could signal volcanic activity. When magma rises to the surface, it lifts the ground, sometimes very slightly. They also monitor the amount, composition, temperature, and speed of gases escaping from fumaroles, as well as the frequency and intensity of earthquakes. Scientists here also have acoustic and infrasound sensors, webcams, and thermal cameras. They also measure the surface temperature of the caldera and many other variables that can indicate whether the volcano is about to erupt. Currently, AI is also helping scientists analyze all this data. If I think about it logically, if Yellowstone really weren't as dangerous as all the scientists claim, then why is it such a closely monitored place? After all, a night guard would be enough for such a safe place, wouldn't it? Why would anyone spend so much money on scientists and their equipment if it were just harmless bubbling ponds, as scientists tell us? So, would scientists know if an explosion were to occur? That's the question. According to scientific estimates, its first eruption took place 2.1 million years ago. Scientists have been studying this volcano in detail for 40 years. How much can they really know about it after all that time? And what do they even know if it is about to erupt? And will they even know if it is about to erupt? Everything is taking place at enormous depth, where current technology is unable to see. In the history of humanity as we know it, we have never experienced such a massive eruption, so all scientific estimates are based on calculations, theories, models, and assumptions, not on direct experience. Moreover, every volcano is different and may exhibit differently before an eruption. And Yellowstone is unique in many ways. The situation is more complicated with supervolcanoes. The uplift of soil or the rise of gas can take years and end without an eruption. That's why, even today, no one can predict when the actual eruption will occur. The Yellowstone volcano is also a relatively complex volcanic system consisting, as we have already said, of two magma chambers. The second one is at a depth of about 50 kilometers. We are unable to see that deep today, and none of us can predict when magma may rise from the lower chamber, triggering an eruption. Even a small eruption can disrupt the rest of the chamber and cause a supereruption. Yellowstone is a ticking time bomb, and only God knows when it's set to go off. And even if scientists knew that a volcano was about to erupt, would anyone warn us? How long would it take, and how many signs of a possible eruption would have to occur for scientists to recognize that an eruption is approaching? Scientists publish the results of their research, but politicians issue warnings. How long would it take for American politicians to warn us? And what would happen if they really warned us? Mass hysteria, looting, the collapse of the transportation and communication systems, a stock market crash, the dollar fall. Well, if they didn't warn us and the volcano really erupted, who could complain? And to whom? If it looks like the volcano is really going to erupt, they will not have an easy decision. So, what would happen if Yellowstone really erupted? That depends mainly on the intensity of the eruption. It could be a minor tremor without major consequences, but it could also be a real super eruption when up to 2,500 cubic kilometers of volcanic material could be thrown into the atmosphere. No matter what kind of eruption were to occur, I don't think it would spell the end of humanity, and even Mrs. Obrenovič didn't indicate anything like that in her predictions. But even so, the consequences of the explosion of such a huge volcano would be catastrophic for the entire planet, and especially the northern hemisphere. In the spirit of the saying, prepare for the worst, expect the best, let's see what the consequences of a real super eruption of the Yellowstone volcano would be. Let's do our little simulation of the consequences. The eruption would likely be preceded by a bulging of the caldera surface, a rapid series of earthquakes, higher concentrations of carbon dioxide, and increased hydrothermal activity. The explosion would then have the power of millions of nuclear bombs dropped by the US on Hiroshima. The eruption could last for weeks or even months. Nothing would survive within a few hundred kilometers of the volcano. Everything would be destroyed by pyroclastic flows, gas, thin lava, and several meter-high deposits of volcanic ash. Volcanic ash would cover 80% of the United States from coast to coast. 90% of people within 1,000 kilometers of the explosion could die. The layers of ash could range from a few meters to several centimeters within thousands of kilometers of the epicenter. 10 centimeters of ash is enough to collapse a roof. If it gets wet, just 5 centimeters is enough. This is not ash as we know it from summer campfires. This ash is more like fine slag. There are microscopic shards of glass and solid porous rock particles that do not dissolve in water or biodegrade. These tiny sharp particles can cause an incredible amount of damage. If inhaled, these particles react with the water in the lakes, forming a substance similar to cement that can cause irreversible damage. If it gets into the eyes, it can cause blindness. Even in small amounts, it causes breathing difficulties, asthma, and pneumonia. This will also be the greatest threat to people and all animals in the area. This ash will cause the initial great destruction, the vast territory of the United States. Massive loss of life would be caused by collapsed roofs of houses, and hundreds of thousands of people would be left homeless. Millions of blinded animals would die. Traffic will collapse. Fine ash crystals will get into electronics, machines, and engines, causing short circuits and clogging. Under its weight, power lines will come down. It will bury drinking water sources, and treatment plants will be unable to handle such a massive influx. There will be a shortage of drinking water. It will cover not only all roads, but also fields, meadows, pastures, and all crops. There will be a collapse of food, energy, and water supplies. This would lead to massive social and economic destabilization. There would be social unrest, migration, humanitarian crisis, all accompanied by a wave of various diseases. Along with the ash, millions of tons of sulfur dioxide and other gases are released into the stratosphere, that is, to an altitude of 10 to 50 kilometers. These gases are not only toxic, but can also cause serious damage to the eyes, mucous membranes, and respiratory tract. As we already know, sulfur dioxide aerosols reflect sunlight and heat, preventing them from reaching the Earth's surface. This would lead to rapid global cooling of up to 10 degrees Celsius. It would be like the onset of an ice age, but within a year. If this event had occurred during spring and summer, it would immediately destroy most of that year's harvest, leading to a massive global famine. The situation would be no better the following year. Summers could be very cold and rainy, with frosts even outside the winter months. Winters would be long and harsh, and so-called volcanic winter would set in, which could last from 5 to 10 years. The worst would have been the first 3 years after the eruption. Gradual warming would begin about 3 to 5 years after the eruption. After 5 to 10 years, climatic conditions would begin to return to normal. But before that happens, ocean currents would be drastically affected and the dynamics of the atmosphere and atmospheric systems would be disrupted. In some places, there would be extreme droughts or floods. In others, massive amounts of snow would fall and the subsequent melting would cause flooding. Another problem for crop cultivation and the functioning of all flora and fauna would be a lack of sunlight, which would eliminate an important element of photosynthesis. The destruction of vegetation would lead to the subsequent death of animals and a large extinction of the entire natural food chain. Many animal species could become extinct. Sulfur dioxide, which turns into sulfuric acid in the atmosphere, would cause acid rain across the entire northern hemisphere. Strong acid rain would have considerable destructive power. Its acidity could reportedly reach the acidity of lemon juice or vinegar. The acid rain would also change the pH of oceans and rivers and would also cause massive extinction of species there. This rain would be most concentrated in the USA and Canada. However, the more it rains, the sooner everything will be cleansed. Such strong acid rain disrupted soil pH, lack of sunlight, and heat would cause the destruction of a huge amount of flora and fauna and water resources. Growing food would become very difficult. Acid rain also accelerates the corrosion of iron and the decay of concrete and limestone structures. This could cause massive damage to infrastructure and houses. Reduced sunlight would also mean a reduction in the efficiency of all solar panels. The question is also how wind farms, power lines, and ground transmitters of mobile operators will go through these new conditions. Will they not corrode and cease to function as a result of acid rain? Another unknown is how we will be able to receive and transmit data from satellites through clouds of dust and sulfur dioxide. Stratospheric flow would carry gases and ash eastward. Within 3 days, toxic clouds of volcanic ash would reach Europe and later cover the entire northern hemisphere. It would depend on the strength of the explosion and the amount of material ejected, but volcanic ash would probably not reach Europe and Asia in large quantities. It would rather be a quantity of fine dust particles that would change the light and color of the sky and could contribute to cooling the climate. This dust could remain in the stratosphere for about 6 months to 2 years. In Europe, we would not have to worry about thick layers of volcanic ash, but we would still not avoid acid rain. Of course, these would be milder than near the epicenter, but they would still be devastating. It is assumed that they would last for several weeks to months after the eruption. Other toxic elements that can be released during a volcanic eruption are fluorides. Their amount depends on the composition of the magma. Near some volcanoes, their concentration is so high that they cause fluoride intoxication, for example, during the eruption of the Laki in Iceland or near volcanoes in East Africa. Excess fluoride disrupts the mineral structure of bones. How does an excess of fluoride manifest itself? Teeth begin to turn brown, and then bones start to break down as well. For example, cattle may begin to break their legs, or in humans, the spine may fracture. This excess fluoride is mostly found in young products of the volcano, so there is a chance that this element would not reach Europe and the rest of the world. We are still talking about the northern hemisphere, but what about the southern hemisphere? The predominant stratospheric flow limits the exchange between the hemispheres and forms a kind of semi-permeable barrier, but with an explosion of this magnitude, even that would not prevent sulfur dioxide from spreading there as well. Global temperatures would drop in the south, but on a smaller scale than in the north. There could be changes in rainfall and agriculture even in countries like Argentina, Australia, or parts of Africa. Of course, the disruption of ocean ecosystems and currents would also have an impact here. The climatic consequences of this devastating explosion would affect our entire planet. Before we continue, I would like to invite you to my channel HeroHero. Here I have prepared a bonus video for you where I provide more information on these topics. Could the Yellowstone volcano eruption be caused by something other than just a natural eruption? What consequences would an eruption have in the field of economy and politics? Is there an evacuation plan? How would this event affect global warming? There I can discuss these topics openly. You'll find the link to my HeroHero channel below this video. So let's continue our story here. The survival skills of today's population have rapidly decreased. Some children today faint when their cell phones run out. Who knows how to catch a rabbit and prepare it for cooking? In the past, people could slaughter horses, which served as means of transport. Today, we can't eat much from cars. Big cities would suffer the most from this crisis. They are full of lawyers, bankers, and businessmen, but they are completely unable to provide for themselves when it comes to food. People will have no choice but to rely on local producers or their own gardens for food. So support the farmer in your community. Maybe he will be the one who can save your life. That's where I see big advantage of villages. People know each other there, are closer to each other, and are more likely to help each other. I wouldn't expect as much looting and unrest here as in the cities. You can't loot George's shop. You have known each other whole lives, and you know that George is the only one who can get things. Those anonymous supermarkets won't have that advantage. Is there any way to prevent the eruption? No. With current technology and knowledge, we are not able to prevent this event in any way. There have been suggestions that the magma chamber could be drilled and cooled, but not only is this technically impossible, but any drilling into the magma chamber could cause one of the possible man-made volcanic eruptions. Will Yellowstone erupt or not? That's a tough question. Scientists should be our main source of support here. But instead they are just putting out edutainment videos, acting like everything in Yellowstone is all sunshine and rainbows, and that nothing is really going on. Any unusual phenomenon is explained by everything possible, but it's definitely not related to volcanic activity. We can only guess ourselves or ask fortune tellers. We already know what Mrs. Obrenovič thinks. Nostradamus predicted great upheavals and changes that will come from heaven and about nations that will be forced to undergo a trial. Earthquakes, even in places where we wouldn't expect it, fire engulfs entire continents. Water is flooding cities. Baba Vanga spoke of great fires and waves that would sweep away entire cities, but also of a new consciousness of humanity that will come only after we go through suffering. The Hopi Indians spoke of this world ending and a new world beginning. Only those who maintain purity of spirit and faith will pass into this world. Yellowstone may show no signs of an impending eruption, and yet it can happen. In 2001, an earthquake measuring 6.8 on the Richter scale occurred under Mount St. Helens, 1,000 kilometers from Yellowstone, and that's when all sorts of warning lights started flashing in Yellowstone. Monitoring stations reported rapid uplift, cracks in the ground stretching hundreds of meters and wide enough to fit a foot inside. The appearance of steam vents where none had existed before. The ground rose from 3 to 9 centimeters in 2 days. Irregular geyser eruptions, an increase in the amount of escaping gases. None of the scientists expected such a reaction. In the end, there was no eruption, but the caldera reacted to a very distant event quite sensitively and with unexpected force. As for the regularity of explosions, there's nothing to go on. The first eruption of Yellowstone took place 2.1 million years ago. The second, 800,000 years later, and the third, 660,000 years later. There was a small eruption here 70,000 years ago. So I don't know why it's commonly stated that Yellowstone erupts regularly once every 600,000 years. I definitely don't see any regularity between the explosions that we could base our conclusions on. Besides, Yellowstone supposedly erupted for the last time 70,000 years ago. The strength of that eruption corresponded to a VEI4 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. Can we therefore assume that the volcano released accumulated pressure with this eruption and will remain calm for thousands of years? Or did this explosion not affect or delay a possible catastrophe in any way? But what if that harmless volcano actually did erupt? The scale of the consequences would depend on the size and cause of the eruption. The above scenario describes the likely consequences of a supereruption, but for example, if the volcano erupted in a series of eruptions and not during a single event, the material would be released into the atmosphere over a long period of time, but not in such huge quantities. In this case, there might not be a volcanic winter. The result could be a global climate instability, but the worst-case scenario might not occur. The consequences would last longer, but they wouldn't be as dramatic. There are a large number of unknown variables in this scenario. If we leave aside the scientists, we have to admit that something truly unprecedented is currently happening in the world. And this is true even in the world of volcanoes. Volcanoes that previously slept peacefully are now erupting. On the contrary, volcanoes that erupted regularly so that you could set your watch by to them are suddenly showing no activity. Earthquakes are occurring with unprecedented force and frequency all over the world. In the last few years, even lay people have been reporting increasing anomalous phenomena and increasing activity in Yellowstone itself. Nothing that used to be true is true anymore. It's also interesting how many people have been interested in this topic lately. Do we sense something at the level of our collective consciousness? In the past, people believed that volcanic eruptions were a sign of the gods' anger. Is it possible that we have exhausted the gods' patience? And when I see how human civilization is evolving spiritually and culturally, I would say we are heading towards some kind of event like that. Only time will tell the truth. What do I think? Will Yellowstone erupt in our lifetime or not? If I take into account prophecy of Mrs. Obrenovič and all the changes that are currently happening on the planet and the information that I have collected, I personally think that there is a high probability that Yellowstone will erupt soon. However, I don't think that it would reach the level of a supereruption. I think the intensity of the eruption would not be greater than VEI 6. As we have already seen today, this is also a relatively strong volcanic eruption with an impact on the entire world. The consequences of the eruption would not be as great as during a supereruption, and everything would return to the normal faster, but we would probably not have an easy life for 2 or 3 years. If you look back in history at eruptions of similar intensity, we could be faced with changes in weather, precipitation patterns, and acid rain. All of this would lead to crop failure and famine. There are about 50 to 70 volcanic eruptions per year. Now we know that even a smaller eruption than the one at Yellowstone can affect the conditions for life on the entire planet, no matter how far away the volcano is. There is no way to prevent such event. Nature will always teach us a lesson in humility and show us who has the final say. All we can do is mitigate the risks and the impacts of such events. One realizes just how fragile life is. Well, if we talk about Yellowstone, we must also mention Campi Flegrei. Every discussion about Yellowstone ends with the discussion turning to the large European volcano Campi Flegrei. It seems like a distraction, but let's talk about this volcano. This volcano is located in Italy about 35 kilometers from the aforementioned Vesuvius volcano. It is also a caldera, but it is not a supervolcano like Yellowstone. It has never erupted with a VEI 8 force. Its strongest eruption was an explosion with a VEI-7 force about 40,000 years ago. Each subsequent eruption has been smaller and smaller. The last eruption was in 1538 with a VEI of 2 or 3. This volcano is still active, and the possibility of an explosion is not excluded. Campi Flegrei is constantly arching. The north of the caldera is now 4 meters higher than it was 70 years ago. 6 million people live in the eruption zone. The explosion could be very powerful because the caldera is partially below the surface of the Mediterranean Sea, and if the magma comes into contact with water, it will quickly turn into steam, creating enormous pressure. After the eruption, the prevailing flow would carry the volcanic material eastward. The Balkans, Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey would be the most affected. Another danger that a volcanic eruption could cause is a possible huge tsunami wave. If the eruption were large enough, this volcano could also affect the global climate and cause acid rain. But I don't think the consequences of this volcano's explosion would reach such a global disaster. As for Mrs. Obrenovič, she didn't mention this volcano in any of the interviews I saw with her. She only talked about the activity of the volcanoes Vesuvius and Etna, whose activity will cause a threat to people and property only local. Scientists assume that Vesuvius and Campi Flegrei share a common magma chamber. Therefore, if Vesuvius were to erupt, it could lead to a decrease in pressure under the Campi Flegrei caldera. The last recorded eruption of Mount Vesuvius was in 1945, when it erupted with VEI-3 intensity. Whether Yellowstone erupts or another volcano, we already have an idea of what to expect from such an event. At last we know that we are far from the masters of the world. We are just a small part of it. What we have can be taken away from us in a second without a return. I don't want to scare you with my video, definitely not. If there is one thing I'd like you to take away from my video, it's humility toward nature and its power, and also information. If by chance this event was to actually occur, you'd at least have a rough idea of what will happen, how it will proceed, and what might happen. In such tense situations, the worst thing is the lack of information. As you can see, there are more questions than answers, and there is no one who can give us a definitive answer. I have learned that when it comes to volcanoes, anything can happen at any time. We can't influence it in any way. We'll just be glad if we can predict it with some advance notice, receive a timely warning, and save as many lives as possible. And what is your opinion on this? What do you think? What do you conclude from all the information you have about Yellowstone and other volcanoes? Will Yellowstone erupt or not? And how powerful will it be? Do you know any other prophecies related to volcanic eruptions? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your opinion. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for your attention. Check out the bonus video on my HeroHero channel, or check out some of my paintings. Links again below the video. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Yours, Evangelina.